By 1934, the K-type Magnette was a little bit long in the tooth. It wasn't selling very well. It was a very heavy car to drive and was replaced by the N-series Magnettes, which are much lighter cars and have a much better chassis layout and therefore handle in a much nicer way. Another significant development in 1934, the year of introduction of the N-type, is that the RAC in their wisdom banned superchargers from the RAC-TT race. So MG in the space of 6 months had to design an unsupercharged racing car, never having not built one since 1930. And they produced the NE, which won the TT in Grand Style by 17 seconds from a 3.5 litre Bentley. Most people know about the JNP midgets, but alongside those was a series of 6-cylinder cars which were developed from the F-type Magnette. The F-type was followed by the L and then the K series, of which the K3 was one of the family, and the N-type was the last of the series of 6-cylinder cars. The engines were all around 1100 or 1300 cc's, and they were a particularly smooth-running engine for the period of time. You'll appreciate that 1300 cc's is approximately the same size as a T-series car, but the engine has got 6 cylinders, so it runs very much smoother. My particular car was originally a works demonstrator, and almost by accident, because it was stolen from the works, became a rally car and entered the Alpine trial in 1934. And then was converted, fitted with a supercharger, and ran in the Monte Carlo Rally in 1935. It went through a number of owners up to 1961 when I bought it, during which time it had lost its original body. So I had the task of rebuilding the car back to its Monte Carlo form, which I did, and I've run it ever since. I've probably covered something in the region of 100,000 miles since 1961 in the car.
This is a 1934 NA Magnette 4-seater. I bought it about 5 years ago as a complete wreck. The chassis had been shortened, narrowed. I managed to find the original chassis rails and cross tubes and rebuilt it to original specification.
What are some of the more unique or outstanding features on this particular car?
This particular car was a police car, a 1934 Lancashire police car. So that really is all I know about it. I haven't got a chassis file on it.
Was that common for them to use?
Yeah, they were quite a lot of MGs went to the police force in 1930, I think 34, 35, thereabouts. And this is just one that survived with the original engine, and the chassis is right now.
What color were they when they were police cars?
I assume they were black. I don't know any difference. This is a 6-cylinder 1271 cc.
N35 MG Magnette NA 6-cylinder. It's got a special body which is called an Allingham body, which is the 2-seater which converts into a 4-seater by turning the lid back. Now they produced only 16 of these. There was a catalogue model from the MG Works originally, and they were catalogued in conjunction with the Airline Coupe in 1934-35. And we've now found about 4 of them back in England, and there are 2 on the road and 1 being restored. And it's a standard N-type chassis. It was sent out to people called Whittingham and Mitchell, who did the body, and then they came back and they were sold as a catalogue model, and they were given a full guarantee by the MG Works. So it was a Works special model basically. Well, it was Whittingham and Mitchell who produced it. I think it was Allingham who designed it probably, and he got it built up. 1 or 2 of them were used in rallies, RAC rallies and things like that. But basically it was a high quality touring car. It sold for £350 in those days, which actually was more than the N-type, of course.
So the unique features of this body then is the jump seat and the fact they move the spare tire up on the side.
Yes, you've got a spare tire and you've got the louvered bonnet. These wings are probably standard N-type, which were produced by the works. So when the chassis went out, they often supplied a lot of the original parts, you know, for the wings, and then the body was just filled in. The N-type was the bigger version of the PA and the PB, which was the 4-cylinder, which was the cross-flow head, and the bigger camshaft. They had the bigger camshaft and better valve timing, basically. These produced 56 brake horsepower in their day. They produce something like a bit more than that nowadays, because with modern materials, etc., and fuel, it goes a bit quicker. And this was just a longer version of the P-type. All the bits, the conrods, etc., they were all the same. Very much a lot of interchangeable parts. They went to the bin and took it out of conrod, and that fitted, you know, the L-type, the P-type, and the N-type, and in fact the K-type. So although they had a lot of models and very few of them, the interchangeability of parts was quite wide. And this is why you get a lot of K3 replicas, because the parts that went into the K3 are similar to the parts that were belonging to the ordinary road car. So you can now build up a K3 replica or anything, or a J4 replica, based on the original J4 or a K-type. So that's how they made their money. But in the 34, 35, of course, you couldn't have, they were running out because they were producing so many models every year or every half year. A new model came out, you know, and of course it was uneconomical basically, and in 36 they got taken over by Morris Motors, and that's when the overhead camshaft stopped. The Triple M, the midgets, Magnets and Magnettes, and they all had overhead camshaft, which was based on the Morris Minor, which you've probably already seen, which is the M-type. And that started it all off with the overhead camshaft Minor, and then they developed it, and MG's produced really their own engine. And you've got a lot of low-down torque, which keeps you going. You can keep up with modern traffic quite easily on these cars. The little P-types, you have to work them hard. You have to steer the old the gearbox around to keep the revs up, but not so much on this.
This is a 1934 NA Magnette. It is an NA which, where the running chassis was, the rolling chassis was supplied to, in this case, Whittingham Mitchell of Kings Road, Chertsey, in 1934, and it had this special body put on it known as the Allingham Coupe, after H.W. Allingham, who was actually rallying MGs in those days, and he was also a body designer, and he designed this body that is peculiar for the cantilevered rear. It is in fact a 4-seater disguised as a 2-seater, and the back cantilevers over and forms a sort of dicky, but actually it isn't a dicky seat. The hood comes up over all 4 seats. Again, the mechanics of the two cars are exactly the same. They are NA Magnettes with 6-cylinder overhead camshaft 1287cc engines. They do about 25 to the gallon. As I say, I've had this one 24 years. I know the complete history of it. The standard NAs, NBs were roughly £265. It varied between 1934 and 36. This one was £365, £100 more. A lot of money in those days. You could go out and buy a Morris 8 or a Ford 8 for £100. So only 11 were built to order between 34 and 36. 3 survive. I've owned 2 of them. I sold one as a basket of parts some 12 or so years ago. The chap's still rebuilding it, but the 3rd one is actually running and was on the London-Brighton run last year and this year. The car behind me here is an NA Magnette with a body by Maltby, M-A-L-T-B-Y, of Folkestone, and it is the only MG, as far as we know, that was ever supplied by a body or with a body by Maltby. There are 2 Lagonda Rapides with similar bodies on that have been seen. I haven't seen them, but it's the only MG with this type of body. It is unique. It was specially ordered by a lady's husband in 1934, and she kept it up to 1971 when it was sold to an MG car club owner, and he sold it to me last year. The interesting thing about it is it's virtually original. It's the original cellulose, the original engine, the original upholstery, and as you can see, it's quite a lavish car with wood inside and wind-up windows, etc. It has a very nice hood, rather like a Tickford hood, with large hinges on either side. It ran very well, apart from a couple of electrical problems in the Regency run to Brighton. I love N-types, particularly in Cornwall, because they're six-cylinder and they're just the job for the hills in this area.
This car is a 1935 NB. It's a two-seater. They made a total of 98 two-seaters. Yeah, more four-seater models, 135 four-seater models. As you can see, the doors open differently than the traditional NBs, which open this way. The NAs, when they first came out, had these heavy doors were too much for those smaller hinges back here, so they had to put these large hinges on, and these came in with the NB and went out with the NB. All the records were thrown away on the N models, the NAs and the NBs. Someone saved all the other factory records when MG closed down, but in this particular car they threw them away. So it's very difficult to determine which is an NA and which is an NB unless you know it from historical perspective. This car definitely is a two-seater NB. The difference between the NA and the NB is the doors, which I already talked about, and this scuttle. They lowered this scuttle quite a bit. It's a little more streamlined. Six-cylinder, as I said, last of the six cylinders. This car happens to have a Marshall blower in it. A man by the name of Peter Gregory got it. He's an English Triple M restorer, and he restored it in the early 80s. Since then, all we know is that it was purchased by a police officer, and we don't have any record of who it was. So there's not a lot of history on the car. But it is one of 98, and that's authentic, and that's what makes it an outstanding car. In 2008, this car won Best of Class in the MG class at Amelia Island. There were two sections of the MG class. There was a sports car class, which this was in, and then there was a racing class. A very top MGs. We got in the racing class, they brought in a K3 from Collier Museum in Florida, and there were some very, very nice cars.
This is a 1934 ND. That's N for Norway, D for Denmark. It's a fairly rare car in that originally 49 of them were built. There are something like 10 of them that are left now. You can see that it has little different lines than a lot of the MGs. It's a little more chunkier looking, a little more upright, a little more narrow. Got a six-cylinder 1271cc engine, supercharged engine. Originally, this car has a body on it which is called a K2 body. The switchover at the MG factory back in 1934, they found out that they had a lot of K2 bodies left over which they hadn't sold. So they decided to put them on the new N-type chassis. And in fact, there were 49 of these, and originally this car was called an NK2. It was because of the K2 body. After that, some years after that, I guess it became known as an ND. And now I think there's something like 10 left in the world that people know about. There are two that we know about in North America, a number in Europe, a couple in Australia. That's the supercharger, centric supercharger, which was not original, in fact. It was added right after the war. But that has a boost of about, it's a low boost supercharger, probably 3 or 4 pounds, which is not very high, but I think But it's a different car from a lot of the MGs. Of course, it's 55 years old, so it's a little rougher riding than a lot of them, but it has a lot of get up and go, as you'd expect with a 6-cylinder supercharged engine. I don't have that, but it used to belong to Nelson Rockefeller. He had a collection of old cars, and this came out of that collection.
It's a 1934 MG NA model. Then there's an MB and then NDs, but this is an NA. NE was the racing model that took the place of the K3, and it had, there were 7 of them made, but that in 1934 they couldn't use superchargers, they outlawed them, so that they took 7 chassis off the line at MG and made race cars on them out of the N-types, and they call them NEs. So it kind of looks like a K3, but I don't want it to look like a K3 because it's an N-type, and K3's had the blower out front, and I've got the blower alongside the engine, and so I don't want it to look like a K3. It is an N-type. So it's an N-type special. Right now, 34 N-type special, I call it.